We by agreement have agreed to do Dan Todd's presentation in question and answer format. Dan is an air quality expert from Evansville, and Dan, I'm just going to do this in kind of question and answer, but I want you to do most of the talking. Just introduce yourself and tell them what you do and what you know.
Good evening. My name is Dan Todd, and I'm Vice President and General Manager of a testing and consulting company in Evansville called Air Quality Services. I've been in this business for 32 years. Half of that time worked at Big Rivers Electric in the environmental department, so I have quite a bit of experience dealing with coal and environmental issues. I have a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from the University of Evansville and a Master of Science in Environmental Science from Indiana University. I've spent, like I say, my whole career dealing with air pollution, with the rules and the laws and the requirements of the federal government and state governments, as well as the testing and monitoring to demonstrate compliance with these things.
We have an affidavit from you, and you might turn in his tab. Dan has his resume there that you can look at for his qualifications, and he also has an affidavit. But earlier in tonight's discussion, there was an inference that the air quality permit process may give some protection to the residents, and I'd like you to speak to that. As to what that means. Does that mean there's not going to be any emissions, or what the air quality permit will do?
EPA is basically charged by Congress to develop air quality standards that will protect the health and welfare of Americans. And it did not say to have zero discharge or zero emissions. Any air permit I've ever worked on, and that would be hundreds of them, there's none of them that has zero emissions. They all have some sort of compliance level that, you know, this number is acceptable, this number is not acceptable, or this number is acceptable, and very definite numbers that you can test and monitor, but none of them I've ever seen are zero.
And so while there may be some acceptability in the nation, that doesn't necessarily mean that a resident would want to live next to any industry that gets an air quality permit.
Right. Well, as you know, I'm not a zoning expert at all. The EPA is required to protect health and welfare, not to protect zoning issues, or not to protect property, or not to protect property values.
Now, in paragraph 11 of your affidavit, which the commissioners had, you speak of 54 tons of fugitive air dust. I'd like you to discuss that and where that comes from.
I can get as detailed as you want. You might tell me shut up here in a minute. EPA has a very extensive system of determining what we call emission factors, and they look at all kinds of processes. We focused in on the process dealing with Western coal, and there actually is a separate subchapter dealing with Western coal because it's sort of unique. We looked at that, read through the seven or eight pages, and pulled out the equations and the emission factors, and took that number because what it is based on is the amount of particles emitted per acre per year. Okay, so we say how can we make that apply here? Well, granted, I took the understanding there would be no ground storage, but my understanding still was that the barges would be open, the rail cars would be open. So I took, I took the square footage of a rail car top and multiplied that out by 110 cars. Took the square footage of the barges, multiplied that out by 15 barges, which is the number I was given at the time, and calculated that area, realizing that you wouldn't have both of those full at the same time. Divided that by half, and then multiplied that simply by the emission factor, and I came up to, in this case, 54 tons. Now, there were a lot of assumptions involved in this, and one of them is average wind speed. We had a list of 6 or 7 different wind speeds, and we took the one in the middle. So the numbers actually ranged anywhere from 46 up to 60, but we just picked the one in the middle.
All right, so it could be anywhere from 46 to 60 tons of fugitive air coal dust, and I guess in my mind, sometimes when we say tons of something, or tons of carbon dioxide, or whatever, are you saying actually if we collected all that dust, put it together, that's really 54 tons of coal that would be in the air, and resulting from this spot just from the fact that they have the coal in rail cars and barges sitting there doing nothing else?
Yes, 54 tons as we commonly know it, 2,000 pounds per ton.
So then, will that number then increase as they move the coal or cause it to transfer?
Yes, anytime there's a transfer or a drop point, as we call it, there will be dust created. And there are different levels of controls for that, but there will be dust created.
Were you provided enough information to really calculate that?
No, not really. We didn't know how many drop points and how far they were and how they were going to be controlled, so we really didn't address that.
And that's because they haven't provided it to us and we couldn't provide it to you. But there will be more than 54 tons from the simple fact we've already heard here once that there will be at least one transfer station, and then there's the drop point at the barge. So those two activities will increase us from a base of at least 54 tons, or 46 tons.
Okay, from the base of the estimated 54 tons, I'll go with that.
And you talked a little bit, maybe you already covered this, that when you said the coal from the western part of the United States is different than the coal from Kentucky in that it creates more dust?
Yes, the gentleman two speakers ago spoke to that also. Western coal is higher in fine particles and has a higher silt content and basically has higher dust emissions possible than Kentucky coal or any eastern coal for that matter.
Now here's the million-dollar question. We've got these tons of coal dust that's going to generate from this operation. Where's it going to go?
Well, when dust is dust, that by definition means it's in the air, at least for a little while. The real heavy particles will drop out fairly quickly. The lighter particles would be picked up and swept along with the wind. And if there's a berm built, yes, some of those will impact the berm, but the finer particles will still go up and over, just like the air over an airplane wing.
All right. Now, we've also heard some discussion that well, you know, Paducah has, you know, trains of coal moving through it all the time. What's the difference of the impact of a moving coal train as opposed to a coal train that's sitting there, staying there all the time, 24/7?
Well, I used to have a lot more exposure when it's sitting there open 24/7. You have some limited exposure as a train car travels down the track.
I guess it's just simple logic that as the train's moving, it's spreading its dust all over its route, as opposed to when the train's sitting there still, it's going to lose all its dust right there.
Yes, I believe so.
Now, there's also, I saw in the staff report written by Mr. Doolittle, some reference to the fact that an air quality permit will not later allow these guys to come back and stockpile it. Is that accurate or true, or do you know?
Well, I don't want to necessarily speak on behalf of the EPA or the Division for Air Quality, but in my 32 years, I've never seen that as a requirement.